What would you do if your HOA sent you a fine because your mailbox was the wrong shade of beige? I moved to Oak Ridge Estates for the peace and quiet. A picturesque neighborhood with manicured lawns, winding cul-de-sacs, and a homeowners association that promised community harmony. At least, that's what the glossy brochure said. It all seemed perfect, until I met Judy Whitmore. Judy wasn't just the HOA president. She was the HOA president, secretary, treasurer, enforcer. Every decision, every rule, every petty fine ran through her clipboard-clutching hands. Imagine a woman in her late 50s with bottle-blonde hair teased half a foot high, an iron-pressed polo tucked into khakis, and the permanent expression of someone who just found out her salad was missing dressing. She drove a white Lexus SUV like it was a squad car and patrolled the streets with the precision of a drill sergeant, searching for violations of her sacred Oak Ridge HOA bylaws. At first, I thought I was safe. My home, a modest but charming ranch-style house, had just the right amount of curb appeal to keep me under the radar. But then I made a mistake. I installed solar panels. It was a Friday afternoon when the sleek, matte black panels were placed on my roof. I was proud of them. Energy savings, environmental benefits, what was not to love? The answer arrived Monday morning in the form of an official-looking envelope shoved into my mailbox. Notice of non-compliance. Dear homeowner, your recent installation of solar panels violates Oak Ridge HOA aesthetic guidelines. Sector 7, subsection B, no visible solar panels. Immediate correction is required. Failure to comply may result in fines and further action. Best regards. Judith Whitmore, HOA President. I scoffed. This had to be a joke. What was I supposed to do, install invisible solar panels? I decided to handle things diplomatically and walked over to Judy's house, 3 doors down. A cream-colored McMansion, aggressively symmetrical garden, every bush trimmed into a perfect sphere. A wooden sign on her porch read Live, Laugh, Love, in cursive that somehow felt ominous. I barely knocked before the door swung open. Ah, Mr. Walker. Her smile was tight, the kind that made your skin itch. I assume you're here about the violation? Yes, Judy, Mrs. Whitmore, she corrected, not missing a beat. Right, I forced a polite smile. Mrs. Whitmore, I wanted to discuss the solar panels. There's nothing to discuss. She chirped it, like a kindergarten teacher about to issue a timeout. They're an eyesore. I blinked. They're state-of-the-art high-efficiency panels. They're black. Sleek. Ugly, she interrupted. Oak Ridge Estates has a classic aesthetic. Would you install spaceship doors on a Victorian home? This isn't a Victorian home, I pointed out. The rule is clear, she said, voice flat as a gavel hitting wood. No visible solar panels. You have until next week to remove them. I stared at her. Mrs. Whitmore, this is ridiculous. She sighed dramatically, pressing a manicured hand to her chest as if my words physically pained her. I tried to warn you, Mr. Walker. The rules exist for a reason. And with that, she shut the door in my face. That should have been the end of it. Maybe I could have fought it through proper channels, found a loophole, made my case. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was just how far Judy Whitmore was willing to go. The first fine arrived the next day. Not for the solar panels, of course. $50. Excessive lawn height. I mowed the grass immediately. The second fine came a day later. $75. Unauthorized trash bin placement. Apparently, my bins were 2 inches too close to the curb. Then a $100 fine, for having the wrong shade of beige on my mailbox. I repainted it. The fines didn't stop. And when I tried to appeal, Judy gave me the same tight-lipped smile. The board is reviewing it. I had never seen this board. As far as I could tell, the HOA consisted entirely of Judy, her clipboard, and whatever personal vendetta she had against personal freedom. And that's when things really started to escalate. The next fine arrived in an envelope stamped urgent action required, $154, improper driveway maintenance. I read it twice. My driveway was clean, no cracks, no oil stains, not a single pebble out of place. It was the same smooth concrete it had always been. Yet, according to Judy's sacred bylaws, the overall condition of my driveway lacked uniform appeal. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't about solar panels. This wasn't about some made-up neighborhood aesthetic. This was about control. Judy wasn't just enforcing rules, she was making them up as she went. I wasn't the only one. The fines weren't random, they were targeted. The elderly couple down the street suddenly owed $300 for excessive weeds when I'd seen their grandson pulling them just last week. A single mother received a $500 fine for an unauthorized garden bed. A Vietnam War veteran, a man who had served his country, was fined for an unapproved flag placement because his American flag was larger than the HOA regulated size. At first, people paid out of fear. Some sold their homes just to escape. But something wasn't adding up. Where was all the money going? It wasn't fixing roads. It wasn't improving community spaces. No new playgrounds, no neighborhood upgrades, nothing. And then, one morning, I saw it. Judy, stepping out of a brand new white Lexus, paid for with HOA funds. At first, I thought I was imagining things. But no, the car's registration was listed under Oak Ridge Estates HOA. And that wasn't all. Judy's own home had received a fresh coat of paint, paid for with a mysterious community improvement grant. A new driveway, new fence, a luxury backyard pool, all while the rest of the neighborhood was getting fined for the most ridiculous infractions. Judy was running an extortion racket disguised as neighborhood compliance. And it was time to prove it. I started by tracking the compliance fund's expenses. Every HOA transaction was supposed to be recorded. But when I requested copies of the financial statements, I received a formal rejection letter signed by none other than Judy Whitmore. Financial disclosures are only available for board review. Board review. Except there was no board. Judy was the board. I needed proof. And I needed help. So I started talking. Whispering at first, testing the waters. And that's when I learned the truth was worse than I'd imagined. Judy had spies. She had an entire network of informants, neighbors who fed her information in exchange for favors. It started small. Someone would report a fence that needed painting, a lawn left unmowed for a day too long, a suspicious garden gnome. These people would mysteriously never get fined themselves, because Judy would forgive their violations in exchange for their loyalty. But it got worse. One night, I saw my next-door neighbor, Mike Carter, sneaking photos of my house from behind a hedge. I waited until he left, then followed at a distance. Sure enough, I watched him walk right up to Judy's porch and hand over a stack of printed photos. I confronted him the next morning. "Mike," I said, holding up a copy of one of the photos, one he had dropped on his way back home. "What the hell is this?" His face paled. "I don't know what you're talking about." I stepped closer. "You're reporting me, aren't you?" He swallowed hard. I didn't have a choice. I folded my arms. "Everyone has a choice." "No, I don't," he snapped. "Do you know what she did? She threatened to foreclose my house. She said I was behind on HOA dues, even though I paid them. She said there was a clerical error and I needed to pay again, or she'd send it to collections. I have 2 kids, man. I can't afford to lose my house." I felt my stomach drop. Judy wasn't just fining people into submission. She was manufacturing debt, forcing people into compliance by threatening their homes. And that's when I realized, this wasn't just a fight about solar panels anymore. This was about bringing down Judy Whitmore. I barely slept that night. The realization that Judy had been blackmailing homeowners, extorting them under the guise of community standards, sent a slow-burning rage through me. She had built an empire on fear, and if the neighborhood didn't bow to her, she created reasons to punish them. But I wasn't going to be her next victim. The next morning, I gathered everything I had, the fines, the HOA's fraudulent financial reports, even Mike's confession. It was time to take this higher. If Judy thought she was untouchable, she was about to get a reality check. I filed an official complaint with the HOA Appeals Board, requesting a formal hearing for my solar panel case, as well as an investigation into the fines she had issued. I expected pushback, but what happened next proved just how deep her corruption went. 2 days later, I woke up to something far worse than another fine. My front door was wide open. The living room was trashed. Papers thrown across the floor, chairs knocked over, drawers yanked open like someone had rummaged through everything. I stood frozen in the doorway. Had I been robbed? Then I noticed something strange. Nothing was missing. My laptop was still on my desk, my TV untouched, my wallet sitting right where I left it. No signs of forced entry. No shattered windows. Just a staged mess that made it look like a break-in. And then the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Judy. I checked my security cameras, my stomach twisting in knots. The footage was grainy, but there she was, standing at the edge of my property, clipboard in hand, watching my house at 2:30 in the morning. Not breaking in herself, but watching. Waiting. And then, at 7 a.m. sharp, a police cruiser pulled up to my driveway. I barely had time to step outside before an officer got out. Judy followed close behind, looking smug as ever. "Good morning, Mr. Walker," she said, voice dripping with fake concern. "We received a call about a break-in at your home. I just happened to be on my morning walk and thought I'd check in." I clenched my jaw. "You called this in, didn't you?" She gasped, placing a hand over her chest. "Now, why would I do such a thing? I only want to ensure the safety of our beloved community." She turned to the officer. "And you see what I mean, don't you? His home security has clearly failed. This sort of negligence could invite more crime. I'd hate for this to become a trend." And just like that, I saw exactly what she was doing. This wasn't a break-in, it was a setup. Judy was trying to get me evicted. She wanted the police to declare my home unsafe, so she could use a fabricated HOA bylaw to remove me from the neighborhood. I took a deep breath, trying to contain my fury. "Officer," I said, keeping my voice even, "there's security footage. I can show you right now. I wasn't robbed, this was staged." Judy's expression flickered for half a second. The officer hesitated. "I'd like to see that footage," he said. Judy immediately changed tactics. "Oh, now, let's not be so hasty," she said with a forced laugh. "Mr. Walker has already had such a stressful morning. Let's just file a neighborhood safety report and call it even." She was panicking. She hadn't expected me to have proof. But this wasn't over. The officer took my statement, but I knew Judy wasn't going to let this go. And I was right. That afternoon, I received an official letter from the HOA Appeals Board. Denied. I read it twice. I had submitted overwhelming evidence, but the appeal had been rejected without any explanation. I checked the letterhead again. Then it hit me. The HOA Appeals Board wasn't a real board. Judy was the only one reviewing appeals. She had been personally rejecting every appeal in Oak Ridge Estates for years. She had fired the original board years ago and rewritten the bylaws to give herself absolute control. And she had just used that power to block my case without a second glance. I saw red. This wasn't just about my solar panels anymore. Judy had rigged the entire system. And I was going to burn it to the ground. Judy thought she had won. She had spent years bending the rules, rewriting the bylaws to suit her own needs, and shutting down anyone who dared challenge her. The staged break-in, the blocked appeals, the relentless fines, it was all part of the game she had mastered, a war of attrition designed to wear people down until they submitted. But she made a mistake. A fatal mistake. It was around 2 a.m. when my phone buzzed with an alert from my security cameras. Motion detected on the side of my house. I tapped into the live feed, expecting to see a stray cat or a raccoon. Instead, I saw Judy. Standing on my roof. For a second, I couldn't process what I was seeing. She was dressed in a black turtleneck and leggings, like some kind of aging suburban ninja, gripping a can of white paint in one hand and a brush in the other. And she was painting over my solar panels. I sat up so fast I nearly fell out of bed. My heart pounded as I watched her methodically destroy thousands of dollars worth of energy-efficient technology, slathering thick layers of white latex paint across the black panels, ruining them beyond repair. She was so confident, so sure she was untouchable that she didn't even try to be discreet. When she finished, she climbed back down, packed up her supplies, and walked straight home, like she hadn't just committed felony-level property damage. I stared at my screen, stunned. Then, like clockwork, an envelope appeared in my mailbox at 6 a.m. sharp. Notice of resolved non-compliance. Dear homeowner. Your solar panel violation has been corrected to comply with Oak Ridge HOA aesthetic guidelines. No further action is required. Best regards. Judith Whitmore, HOA President. I gripped the paper so hard it crumpled in my fist. She thought she had won. She thought she could bully, fine, and sabotage me into submission. But this time, she broke the wrong rule. I spent the next 4 hours combing through every HOA bylaw, every municipal energy regulation, every loophole that Judy had overlooked. And then I found it. Bylaw 13, Section D. A single line buried in the fine print under energy compliance standards. Any modifications to a homeowner's energy infrastructure must be approved by a licensed contractor and documented with the city permit office. Judy had destroyed my solar panels without a permit. That meant she had violated both HOA bylaws and city regulations. Which meant she was personally liable. I didn't hesitate. At 9 a.m. sharp, I was at the city permit office, filing a formal complaint. I handed over photos, the HOA's own violation notice, and, most damning of all, my security footage. The clerk barely glanced at my documents before shaking her head. "Oh yeah," she said, stamping approved across my report. "That's illegal." By noon, a city inspector was at Judy's house. I watched from my porch as she greeted him at the door, clipboard in hand, already mid-lecture about community aesthetics. Her confidence lasted exactly 5 minutes. Then the inspector handed her a copy of my complaint file, and her face turned the color of expired yogurt. For the first time in her reign of terror, Judy was speechless. And I wasn't done. The city didn't just issue a warning. They slapped her with a $122,000 fine for unauthorized modification of private property. And she was legally required to replace my solar panels, at her own expense. I wanted to savor the moment. To watch her sputter, argue, and attempt to weasel her way out of it. But Judy was nothing if not predictable. She didn't apologize. She didn't admit fault. She came back swinging. The next day, a thick envelope arrived in my mailbox. Oak Ridge Estates HOA versus Ethan Walker. Judy was suing me for malicious defamation and disruption of community harmony. I almost laughed. She really thought she could sue her way out of this. Fine. If she wanted a legal fight, she was about to get one. And this time, I wasn't alone. Judy thought she could sue me into silence, bury me under legal fees, and scare me into backing down. But she had underestimated just how many enemies she had made. By the time I received the lawsuit, the entire neighborhood was fed up. The fines, the threats, the stolen trash bins, the forced paint jobs, everyone had a story, and for the first time, they weren't afraid to speak up. We organized. 37 homeowners signed a petition to dissolve the HOA. We gathered evidence, compiled years' worth of fines, and dug up every shady financial transaction Judy had ever made. When the final HOA meeting came, held in her own pristine, overly symmetrical living room, I stood up and raised my hand. Motion to dissolve the HOA. The room erupted. Judy's face went pale. "You can't do that," she shrieked, slamming her gavel so hard it nearly cracked the table. "The board has to approve it." From the back of the room, someone spoke. "You are the board, Judy." A vote was cast. 72% of Oak Ridge Estates voted in favor of dissolving the HOA. Judy froze. The board, her board was gone. All of her power, erased in a single moment. The neighbors cheered, but Judy wasn't done. That night, at exactly 1:15 a.m., my security camera caught her one last time. She stood in my yard, a gallon of historic HOA beige in one hand, a dripping paintbrush in the other. She raised it toward my front door, ready to leave one final act of vengeance. Then the red and blue lights lit up the street. The police car pulled up. An officer stepped out, shining a flashlight right at her. "Ma'am, put the brush down." Judy whipped around, eyes wild. "You set me up." She screamed at me, paint still dripping from her brush. The officer sighed. "Ma'am, you've been fined, removed from the HOA, and now you're trespassing on private property. Are you really going to do this?" Judy stiffened, nostrils flaring. "This is my neighborhood. I built this community." "Yeah," I muttered from my porch, arms crossed. "That's the problem." She snapped. With one last act of pure insanity, she threw the paintbrush at my face. It missed. Barely. The officers didn't hesitate. "Ma'am, turn around. Hands behind your back." The handcuffs clicked into place. Judy shrieked as they guided her into the squad car, ranting all the way. She locked eyes with me through the window, seething. "You'll regret this, Walker." I wiped a speck of beige paint off my cheek. "I already don't." The car pulled away. The next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing, people whispered, some openly cheered. Word traveled fast. By noon, a small crowd gathered in front of my house. Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman from 2 streets over, leaned in close. "Is it true?" she whispered. I grinned. "She's gone." The relief was instant. Someone popped a bottle of champagne. A lawn gnome magically reappeared on a neighbor's porch. The first summer after Judy's reign, we held a block party, the first one allowed in years. And Judy? She wasn't done embarrassing herself. Her trial came 2 months later. She insisted on representing herself. She cross-examined herself. "Did you intend to commit vandalism, Mrs. Whitmore?" she asked in a high-pitched voice. Then, switching tones, she answered herself. "Absolutely not. I was merely upholding the values of Oak Ridge Estates." The courtroom went silent, even the judge looked stunned. Judy was found guilty. Fined $5,000. Ordered to pay for my solar panel repairs, given community service. And the cherry on top? She was banned from holding any HOA position for life. Her community service? Picking up trash in Oak Ridge Estates. She spent weekends in an orange vest, forced to clean the neighborhood she once ruled, while the very people she terrorized watched from their porches. 3 months later, she put her house up for sale. I thought that was the last I'd see of her. Until one evening, I saw a real estate agent giving a tour. A couple walked through the property, pointing at things, nodding in approval. Then I nearly choked on my drink. The buyers? My parents. I called my mom immediately. "You're buying Judy's house?" She laughed. "The price was great, sweetie. And we figured we'd move closer to you." "Mom," I groaned. "She's a nightmare." "Don't worry," my mom said, smirking. "I've dealt with worse." 2 weeks later, she called me, cackling. "Guess what I just did?" I sighed. "What?" "I painted the house neon blue." I wheezed. "You did not." "Oh, I did." She paused. "And you should have seen Judy's face when she came to say goodbye. That was the last time anyone saw Judith Whitmore. The neighborhood thrived without her, the fear was gone, people painted their houses however they wanted, wind chimes returned, lawn gnomes flourished. And every morning, I sat on my porch, sipping coffee, watching my jet-black solar panels soak up the sun. Without a single fine in sight. So tell me, have you ever felt powerless against HOA, or Karen, rules? Share your experiences below. Let's see who had it worse, ***.